This is a game I've been working on for roughly 2 months called Ratshot. It's not a big project yet, but it's definitely been the most challenging game I've worked on compared to the other two I've made. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm RetroCrow, aka the only member of Maceface Games. I started making games back in April of 2023, with my first game being Motorfish, a discontinued roguelike, and my next one being Chefware, a game based on the WarioWare series. These games are cool and all, but they aren't really the games I truly want to make. After Chefware, I figured it was time I start working on my dream game. So I started work on Ratshot to prepare for my dream game. Think of it like this, okay? The first two games I've made have been small, 5-minute experiences, and now I'm supposed to jump straight into my magnum opus. I needed a project to bridge the gap and to teach me the skills necessary for making my dream game. The scope of this dream game was going to be pretty big, around the size of most $20 indie titles that you see today, if not bigger. So Ratshot is going to be half of that, a $10 indie game. I knew that my dream game was going to be a platformer, so I started thinking of ideas for a platformer game. In my last game, Chefware, there was one background that I really liked drawing, in the trash throwing minigame. It had this grimy city sort of feel to it, and I really liked the colors, so I knew I wanted to make a game with a similar vibe. Plus, if I made another game in the real world, I could bring back the main character from Chefware and hopefully, bring in some of the fans from that game. Because it's a platformer, I also need the main character to be relatively small, so I sketched up some ideas for some sort of city rat character. As far as planning goes, that's as far as I went. I was really eager to get started, so I basically improvised the main character and everything else for the first little bit of development. The original design for him had his eyes underneath the hat, and occasionally in some animations you'd see his eyes pop out from underneath. The issue was that everyone, and I mean everyone, thought the teeth were giant like crazy eyes, and one guy even thought it was like hair somehow. I don't know how. I thought about adjusting the teeth in some way, but eventually I was just like, yeah, I'm not going to deal with this all throughout development, and I give him 2 big red eyes. Now for the gameplay. This is where the title of the video comes in. My previous 2 games never had any set order of levels and would be more of like an endless mode until a certain point where you fought a boss. However, this time, whenever I added a new mechanic, I couldn't just throw it into the content hole. I had to think of where to place it, how it should be introduced, how often it should appear, and all that. I've heard this idea thrown around that to make a good game, all you need to do is make sure the basic gameplay is fun, and then from there the game will just build itself. Without knowing it, I was in a way testing if this hypothesis was true just by making the game.
So, is it?
Hold your horses, Dairy Queen mouth, we're getting there. So I started work on the gameplay. It's a big mash of the main movement options I think every game should have. Big ass boost into the air, a ground pound that's really fast, and a slide. It's very simple, but I think I like it that way, and after messing with some stuff, it became pretty fun to just move around. Now that I had the movement, all I needed was an attack. Sounds simple enough. This took 5 different attempts to get right. Yeah, so this was my first sort of roadblock I ran into with this game, which was how to do combat. I'm making a platformer, so I knew I had to have enemies, but I couldn't figure out a good way to fight them. My first thought was to just let the player shoot the enemies. The character has a gun, so why shouldn't he be able to shoot it? Turns out combat becomes pretty boring if attacking enemies has absolutely no risk whatsoever. Honestly though, I was fine with this. I prefer melee attacks in games anyways. Besides, it wouldn't make sense for shooting to have this big of a boost in the air and nothing on the ground. I analyzed the character design and tried to figure out what attack animation would feel the most fun in game. He could maybe use his gun to slap enemies, but I couldn't get the animation to feel right. He could do a big punch, but I found that it didn't feel as fun as the swing motions, and I couldn't get the animation to feel right. Okay, he's a rat, he'll just bite the enemies. Nope. Once again, I couldn't get the animation to feel right. At this point, all the routes started to lead to one thing, a slice of some sort. It's a swinging motion, and it shouldn't be too hard to animate. This took like 4 hours. Why am I so bad at animation? While we're here, let's go over some other things that were absolute pains in my ass. Creating a tile set. This is such a weirdly different skill than any other game art I've done, and there's a lot more possible tiles than you might think. Breakable blocks. I really liked the ones in Pizza Tower, and I wanted something similar in my own game, but it turns out making breakable blocks the way I wanted to was very difficult. Took like 5 hours. I made a tutorial on how to do it out of rage that there weren't any. Slopes. No, I'm just kidding. These weren't a pain in the ass. They were a pain in the soul. I wanted the gun drill to be able to go straight into the slide, and I thought that slopes would be a cool way to do that since you could drill into them and then auto enter the slide. Well, it turns out slopes are really fucky-wucky in every way possible and mass-produce glitches for fun, some of which I still haven't fixed. The first issue was that because of how I drew the player sprite, standing still on a slope looks really stupid. The moral for you all here is to make sure the player stands on a small point instead of a wide area like mine. Next was just all the coding junk. I mean, running into a downward slope makes you fall off of it, running up a slope feels slow and yucky, and I had to figure out how to actually do this drill into slide thing I was talking about earlier. Speaking of which, sliding up a slope is just a thing you can do, and that looks way wrong. Also, this exists, and I don't know what is happening or how to fix it. I don't even need to watch this video. I mean, I have already lived through it. But despite all of that, I was able to sit my ass down and get it working, which meant I was finally ready to get started on the first level. Aw, yeah, look at this fucking level. You got all the main mechanics. You got the you can use both your gunshots. Yeah, it wasn't long before I ran out of things to put in the level, which means it was time to add some new mechanics to fill the levels with. I already have the fun gameplay, so this part should just come naturally, right? I mean, it kinda did. A lot of games have some way of launching back into the air after doing a ground pound, and having the drill move just kill enemies didn't really feel satisfying. I decided to make it so the player would boost way into the air when gun drilling onto an enemy, and it turned out to be pretty fun. It also looked like it was going to be useful for boss fights, as it gives the player a unique second way to attack. I thought it'd be cool to add the same boost to the player's shoot ability, and that also turned out to be pretty fun. So, from the looks of it, the hypothesis was true! I went back to the level I was making and began working on it again, trying my best to introduce the new mechanics in a, a subtle sort of level design-y sort of way, like what Celeste does. You know what I mean? It was a struggle, to say the least. The only level design I've ever done is making stuff in those build-your-own-level games, and looking back on those, they're all just a big mess of all kinds of different mechanics with no real consistency. Now I was faced with figuring out how to use the few mechanics and tools I had to make a level that not only introduced said mechanics, but also expands upon them in unique ways. I did my best, and I'm gonna keep what I have until I have a reason to change it, or I see something wrong with it. So now we're here. The first level's done, and I can now sort of safely judge whether the hypothesis from earlier is true. The answer? Yeah, kinda. From my experience working on this game, I do think that having good, fun movement for a platformer is obviously really important. And despite the progress I've made, I'm still probably going to be fine-tuning the moveset of the player up until release. But to say that the game makes itself isn't really accurate in my opinion. You can have the greatest moveset in the world in front of you, but you'll still have to struggle through the animation, the dumb coding, the level design, and all the other amazing obstacles of game development, especially if you're working in a new genre and scope. The idea still stands though in the fact that it's a lot easier to make fun mechanics if they have a fun moveset to work with. This zipline, for example, turned out to be really fun on its own, but you know what's more fun than just jumping into a zipline? Drilling down into it, or shooting yourself off of it, or shooting yourself into it. This is just a result of a new mechanic working with the already made moveset, so in that way the game, or at least that part of the game, made itself. If I were to reword this, I would change it to make a good game, start with creating some fun gameplay that works on its own, so that when you do add more mechanics later on, they already feel pretty fun without you having to do as much work. One last note I'll leave you with is that while this rough formula might work for making a fun game, it won't necessarily make your game stand out. One issue I've been facing with this game is how to make it unique compared to the other cool platformers in the indie scene. You could say that the movement, art style, or setting is unique, but when push comes to shove, people are going to call this a Pizza Tower clone.
You got me.
At its absolute simplest form, yeah, this game is just kind of Pizza Tower, but without the few things I dislike about the game. But as this game grows, I'm hoping that it'll start to establish its own unique identity just a little bit more. If you have any ideas for just anything, let me know in the comments.